Right now, somewhere in your brain, there's a tiny region called the nucleus accumbens. It's about the size of a pea, and it doesn't care about your goals, your relationships, or your self-respect. It cares about one thing: getting a hit of dopamine as fast as possible. That's what you're actually fighting when you're fighting lust. Not a moral failing, not a character flaw, a piece of ancient wiring that's being hijacked by modern technology designed by people whose entire job is to hijack it. So if you've tried to just have more willpower and it hasn't worked, that's not because you're weak. It's because willpower was never the right tool for this job. Today I'm going to show you what actually is. Today's topic is one almost nobody talks about clearly, because it's either wrapped in shame or wrapped in denial. We're doing neither. We're going to look at lust the way a neuroscientist looks at it, as a system. Systems can be understood, and what can be understood can be redirected. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why lust feels so overpowering, why most common advice fails, and 4 things that actually change the wiring. Not just suppress the urge for 5 minutes. Let's get into it. Section 1. What lust actually is. Let's start with a definition that's going to sound unromantic because it is. Lust is your brain's dopamine-driven anticipation system, firing in response to a cue and demanding action. Notice what's missing from that sentence: the actual object of desire. That's because lust isn't really about the person or the image or the scenario in your head. It's about the anticipation of a reward. Neuroscientist Kent Berridge's research draws a sharp line between liking something and wanting it. And wanting is the louder, more primitive system. You can want something intensely that you don't even like very much once you have it. That's lust in a nutshell. Here's why that matters. If lust were really about the object, satisfying it once would settle the system down. But it doesn't. Dopamine isn't a pleasure chemical. It's a seeking chemical. It spikes before the reward, not during it. Which means feeding the urge doesn't close the loop. It reinforces the loop. Every time you act on it, you're not relieving the system. You're training it to fire harder and faster next time, because you just proved to your brain that the cue works. This is the same mechanism behind every behavioral addiction. Gambling, social media, junk food, different content, same circuitry. And there's a second piece: novelty. Your brain's reward system is wired to respond more strongly to new stimuli than familiar ones. That's why lust today so often attaches to an endless scroll of images rather than one person. Novelty itself has become the drug, separate from whatever's being looked at. So, the real enemy isn't desire. Desire is fine. It's human. It's old. It's not going anywhere, and you don't actually want it to. The enemy is an unmanaged on-demand reward loop that gets stronger every time you trigger it without resistance. Section 2. Why willpower alone fails. So, if it's a loop in the reward system, why doesn't just resist harder work? 2 reasons, and they're both backed by basic neuroscience. Reason 1. Willpower is a depleting resource, not a fixed trait. Psychologist Roy Baumeister's research on what he called ego depletion found that resisting one temptation makes you measurably worse at resisting the next one, because self-control draws from a shared, limited pool. If your day is already full of decisions, stress, and self-restraint, at work, with food, with your phone, by the time you hit a sexual trigger at 11 p.m., your tank is already near empty. You're not failing because you're undisciplined. You're failing because you scheduled your hardest fight for the moment you have the least left to fight with. Reason 2. You cannot out-willpower a cue you haven't removed. This is the part almost everyone gets backward. People treat lust like a battle of pure willpower in the moment of temptation. But the moment of temptation is the worst possible time to start fighting. You're fighting at the peak of the wave instead of before it forms. Behavioral psychology calls this decision fatigue plus proximity to cue. And it's an unwinnable combination almost by design. The fight isn't lost in the moment. It's lost, or won, hours before, in the environment you built. This reframes the entire problem. The goal isn't be stronger in the moment. The goal is need less strength in the moment by changing the conditions that produce the moment in the first place. Section 3. The 4 things that actually work. Here's where we get practical. 4 shifts, each targeting a different part of the system. 1. Friction, not willpower. This comes from behavioral economics, not psychology. The same principle that explains why putting junk food on a high shelf reduces how much you eat, even though it's right there. Every extra second between impulse and action gives your prefrontal cortex, the slower, rational part of your brain, time to catch up to the fast, emotional part. Phone-based blockers, accountability software, even just keeping your phone in another room after a certain hour. None of this is about being unable to access something. It's about making the path slightly longer, so the decision happens in daylight instead of in the dark, half asleep, no resistance window, where most lapses actually occur. 2. Identify your triggers like data, not character flaws. Boredom, loneliness, stress, fatigue, even certain times of day. These are the actual triggers, far more often than attraction itself. This is basically urge surfing, a technique from addiction therapy. When an urge hits, you don't fight it and you don't feed it. You name it. This is boredom at 9 p.m. This is stress after that conversation. Labeling an urge moves processing from the emotional brain to the language centers, which measurably reduces its intensity. You're not suppressing the feeling. You're downgrading it from emergency to data point. 3. Replace the loop. Don't just block it. This is the part most people skip, and it's the reason most attempts fail within a few weeks. If you only remove the behavior, you leave a dopamine-shaped hole, and your brain, which hates an unfilled loop, will find something to fill it with, usually something just as compulsive. The fix is to deliberately build an alternate reward into the same trigger window. Exercise, a call to a specific friend, a hobby with its own momentum, something that also produces dopamine, just on a healthier circuit. You're not white-knuckling abstinence. You're rewiring which path the same urge takes. 4. Build identity, not just rules. Research on habit change consistently shows that I don't do that outperforms, I'm trying not to do that. A rule is something you negotiate with in a weak moment. An identity is something you defend. This isn't a slogan. It's a measurable difference in how your brain frames the decision. Rule breaking feels like a one-time slip, but identity breaking feels like becoming someone else, which is a much higher bar for the brain to clear in a 2 a.m. moment of low resistance. Section 4. What to expect. Realistic timeline. I want to be honest with you about something almost no one says in these videos. This isn't linear, and it isn't fast. Dopamine pathways that have been reinforced for years don't rewire in a week. Most people who successfully change this kind of pattern describe something close to a 2 to 12-week window before the intensity of urges measurably drops. And even after that, occasional spikes are normal, not a sign of failure. The goal isn't a perfect streak. A slip is information, not a verdict on your character. The actual predictor of long-term success isn't never failing. It's how fast you return to your system after a failure, instead of spiraling into shame and abandoning it entirely. That spiral, by the way, is its own trap. Shame is one of the strongest predictors of relapse in every addiction-adjacent behavior because shame increases the stress and isolation that triggered the behavior in the first place. So, if you take one thing from this section, take this. Self-criticism is not a deterrent here, it's fuel. So here's the real shift I want you to walk away with. You're not weak, you're running ancient hardware in an environment specifically engineered to exploit it, by people with enormous budgets whose only KPI is your attention. Fighting that with willpower alone is like trying to win an arms race with your bare hands. But understanding the system changes the fight. Reduce the friction in the wrong direction. Catch the trigger before the urge. Give the loop somewhere else to go. And build the kind of identity that doesn't need to redecide this every single night. If this helped, subscribe. I break down the psychology behind the habits that actually run your life every week. And if you want a deeper breakdown of urge surfing and identity-based habit change, I've got a video linked right here that goes further into both. Take care of that brain. It's the only one you've got.